That was very good.
Thank you,
Very
sir.
enjoyable. We met in Beirut about a year ago. He gave me some good tips about when I interviewed Steve Wozniak. So now I'm
That's a good. It's a good way to always open a story. We met in Beirut.
Absolutely. The Brighton Digital Mafia is a little bit of a kind of misnomer, but we were talking about this earlier. Is that one of my kind of first jobs was being a communications director on the first series of Big Brother, and there was a Brighton company at the time there called Victoria Real. And they'd built and designed the website. So Channel 4, for some insane reason, gave me complete control over the internet because they didn't understand it. And I was checking the message boards, and there was one particular woman. It was causing all types of trouble. You know, like they're a disgrace to streaming, they're a disgrace to this and all that stuff. So I kind of went in as an anti-influencer and said, I don't know why, and just said, listen, you know, if you kind of shut up, I'll feed you some information, you know, and then you'll be the exclusive recipient of this, and then you can share it with your lot, not knowing if it would work. And she said, oh, thank you. Within 30 seconds, she was posting, I've just had a word from Deep Throat at Victoria Real, this is happening, this is happening. But the point of that kind of slightly abstruse story is that your experience of messaging boards in the mid-90s, you were one of the pioneers in that type of activity and where influence actually began online. Is there anything you can share with this audience about how that's kind of transmuted and changed, or maybe version minus 2.0 perhaps?
So this is the mid-90s, and I had just moved to Silicon Valley. It's like 96, and one of my I had no marketing training. I was a technologist, but I don't even know how I ended up in marketing. That's a story over drinks, I suppose. But my task was to help some of the early digital camera manufacturers. Digital cameras. Back in the day, there was film. For all those who don't know what I'm talking about, we didn't have digital pictures all the time. But it was 100% film market, and I was supposed to help these companies consumerize digital photography. And at the time, nobody even knew what that was. And conventional marketing, so I was part of this team that had to figure out why conventional marketing wasn't working, because people weren't adopting digital cameras. And so I, as a geek, said, well, have we looked at message boards and forums where people are having these conversations? Because this is before social, this is before blogging, this is before a lot of stuff that we really understood today. And it turned out that there was a huge community of these influencers that we didn't call them influencers at the time, but that were actually driving the conversation about digital photography, and they were all under the radar.
Were they photographers or were they geeks?
Some of them were geeks and some of them were photographers, but I think together they were geek photographers, I guess. And but talking to them, you couldn't just say, hey, I've got this company that's making a digital camera I want to introduce. You had to actually become part of the community. I had to become an expert on digital photography so that I was adding value to the communities, I was answering questions, and then taking that insight back to how we were going to figure out how to penetrate these communities. And it was fascinating because it changed the whole premise of how marketing unfolded. And so a lot of this work is credited with the consumerization of digital photography, because what we did, if you remember the spheres of influence, we drove the bell curve. We went to early adopters, we went to the early market majority, and there were different influencers for every stage of the conversation, and we drove a lot of that. In fact, most of the early sales and all of the early influences trace back to these boards, and we did it all again later with online photo sharing at the time where people were still printing pictures before they started posting on the internet. And it was because of the trust factor of how people believed in other people like them to help guide their decisions and change their behavior.
So it was another channel for influence, a new channel for influence, and that almost in a weird way led to a relationship with Ashton Kutcher. And, I mean, so I've never understood that link.
So I started, this was so interesting, this work, but at the same time, and this is the 90s, there was no budget for it. People weren't buying this. So I started a company in 1999 dedicated to exploring digital influence. and helping companies connect with audiences using digital media solely, and a lot of these networks of influence. And the only people who were interested in that service at the time were startups, because they needed all the help they could get, but they had no time or capital for classical marketing because it just took too long to build their markets. So a lot of this work became what is now a lot of the principles for today's digital marketing, not just influence, but just digital marketing and branding in general. And along the way, Ashton Kutcher became my business partner.
Wow.
And we started to do a lot of this for not just startups, but for a lot of his friends, like Oprah Winfrey. And
was he really influential at the time?
Yeah.
He was, wasn't he? Yeah.
And this is when he started to do his race with CNN.
Right.
This is where he did his, he wanted to prove the concepts of influence as an influencer as well. This is where he got his Nikon relationship. But he did this because he really wanted to understand the dynamics of his influence, but also then translating that for a new type of marketing for brands and celebrities.
Right, okay. So then he became an investor on the back of that, or is it true that his kind of investments are more than he's ever earned in his movie career?
Yeah, at some point we started not just doing that, but recognizing that if you can use this same principle for startups, you create value in startups. Yeah. And so if you can create value in startups, why not invest in them before that value is created?
Yeah. You were talking about celebrity endorsement and then just influencer endorsement as two separate things. One of the things maybe the people in the audience would want to know, I mean, I remember Clout and Peer Index, these kind of noble efforts at, measuring influence. Is there anything like that? I mean, I suppose they're almost discredited, are they? Or what's next in that? Where do you find influencers that aren't celebrities?
I think the problem with Clout and Peer Index wasn't their intent. I think their intent was actually to try to show that there was some type of social capital with individuals and try to show you the topics that made them influential. But somewhere along the way, as narcissists, we leaned on those numbers in the way that we lean on all numbers and vanity metrics is, well, how popular are we? How authoritative are we? And we sort of missed the entire premise of what they were trying to do, which was, here are people who are influential in some regard because of these things. But then that's also, I wrote that quote, influence is not popularity and popularity is not influence, based on Clout and Peer Index, because we were missing the entire premise of what influence really was.
When it comes to influence and the channels, message boards have moved on, Twitter, in a strange place right now, 280 characters, all of that. I love Twitter. I think it's amazing. What do you think, as a channel of influence, Twitter is nowadays? Because I was once on a panel in Dublin about 3 or 4 years ago, a guy called Eamon Carey, top guy, and we had a kind of Facebook, Twitter off, and basically said, which one would you give up? And I won on the side of Twitter. That's completely changed for me. It's gone totally back into Facebook engagement.
Really?
It's really strange, and I don't think I'm the only one, actually. But I'd like your opinion on that. What is happening to Twitter? Where should we go to influence?
Oh, well, I don't know. We should ask the Russians.
Yeah, really. Well, they know that. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lesson there, though, that every network in its own way influences people differently. That's why I came up with that conversation prism, is that there is no one network of influence. Every single, I mean, look, if in all seriousness, if you really understand how Russia played roles in Brexit and our U.S. election,
really?
Lord help us, there are valuable insights for how influence breaks down. It's basically what we talked about today. 10 years ago, I wrote a paper for a government entity in the United States that said, this is how you can manipulate how people talk and how people believe in social media. And these are going to be channels, both paid and earned, that are going to become powerful. And I used it as sort of, I said, with this comes great responsibility. And I wrote this 100-page paper on how we could use this for good, right? The exact playbook is being used right now in politics. And unfortunately not for good. But whatever we think of Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, they are all powerful in their own way, but they're all different in how they influence and who influences and why, and how we earn that influence and how we pay for that influence. So it's my opinion on which network is best and is not relevant, right? It's simply by who am I trying to reach and what's important to them and how do they communicate and who influences them, and then reverse that backwards.
Yeah.
But on a personal note, I used to love the exercise of brevity on Twitter. It forced me to think through very creatively what I was going to say and why it would matter, and in the hopes of earning resonance and relevance. 280 is a stretch, man. I have to think about it too much.
I'm an ex-Fleet Street sub-editor, so 140 characters for me was awesome. You know what I mean? But, I mean, we've run out of time, but fuck them. We're going on talking. Instagram and Snapchat. What about them? I mean, I'm beginning to think that it's not about Instagram or Snapchat or any of those channels. It's about the way that people use emojis, and you have emoji experts. And I'm seeing it in the way that I communicate with email or any type of platform. Is that there are more of these. Right, okay, you're quite smart with the old emoji and all that. And what you said about the way that communication is changing. I kind of think that we're going back to cave painting in the end, is that we'll be able to do it in that way. You know?
There's a company called Postmates, and in Los Angeles they're quite famous for running the first billboard campaigns, which is ironic, but billboard campaigns that were only in emoji. And people loved them. They could read it and understand it right away. You show it to somebody who's not, say, an emoji user, they had no idea. And so a lot of critics would say, oh, well, this is a big failure for them. It makes no sense. But it made perfect sense to the people that we were trying to reach, and also made the company cooler, and it drove adoption. But yeah, how people are communicating is changing. This is why I became an anthropologist or digital anthropologist a long time ago, is because I needed to understand how people were changing in order to align technology investment strategies to be relevant, right? Because when people don't necessarily know they're changing, they won't tell you how they've changed. It's just they keep changing, right? Snapchat is a good example of that, right? It's made a society of people who communicate with things that disappear, right? But now it's also changed behavior where augmented reality on top of your photographs is now just an everyday thing. I can give you an example of just how far that's changed behavior, right? Snapchat has had a direct impact on the beauty industry for people who work remotely, who don't want to wear makeup, and who are using applications for when they have to Skype into meetings, having a filter that puts makeup on their face. So this is this is what I meant by we're trying to reach people who love to vomit rainbows. It's like it is a very different audience now.
And it is also, I mean, probably the second example of AR actually working. I mean, the first example, in my opinion, is 50 years old, and that's subtitles on a movie. Right?
Oh, right.
That's the first AR. You know, that changed the way that you do stuff. We're going to have to go.
You don't want to stay on here all day?
But will you be around tonight for people to chat to?
Yes, I'll be here for the reception. So if you stick around, I'll hang around any time that alcohol's put in front of me. Then
fantastic.
We've got a deal.
Brian Solis.
Thank you, Monty. Thank you, sir.